it'll tag you in this post in just a second. Just waiting for the feed to catch here. There we go. And I always tell people just keep this screen open when we're actually speaking, because if you look at the Twitter box, it'll get really like really like overwhelming because there's a little bit of a lag and it's just
Seriously, Mike, I run my own spaces. I can handle it. So I'll be fine. Don't worry.
you will be just fine. Looks like there's just a little bit of a, just seeing why it won't let me hit the post here.
Yeah, hopefully it'll work on my end because my internet upload is slow. So
Yeah, I wonder if that's what's happening right now.
because I have a little notice saying 80% uploading, 77, so you might not
Yes,
be able to do it.
that might be the reason actually. So yeah, and that's just fine if that's the case, because if it doesn't work on one, it won't work on the other. So
Yeah, internet was made for consumption, not contribution. True story.
All right, I'm trying this one more quick time, and then if not, we don't need to
I
worry
definitely
about
like
it.
my Zoom better because it'll like smooth out my face a little bit. So
Oh, you
this,
look great. Don't be silly.
oh yeah, I'm gonna be 50 next May, this May.
Oh,
So
really?
yeah.
Yeah, you look great. Yeah, I just hit 43, and very very fortunate, like health wise.
It's great.
But I do feel it like I go to the gym a lot and stay like relatively active, and you just feel it. You know, there's a different felt sense of being in your 40s than your 30s.
For sure.
All right, you know
Yeah,
what?
it might not work. That's why I asked you about Riverside before because I've had trouble with
Okay,
using it on my end.
no worries. We'll go ahead and just dive right in. So I'm
That's
so
perfect.
excited. I mean, I've been reading your content for a while. You're one of the people that I started reading as soon as I got into entrepreneurship and I was about to make the jump. I love everything about the polymath stance. So maybe just as a starting place, could you walk through a little bit about your background and how you landed to where you are now?
Typical polymath style. Like, where do I start? We kind of joke around when someone's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And we're like, the last week, today, or like the last 5 years. What do you want?" A little bit about my background. Some people find this really interesting. I actually was born to a 16-year-old girl, or conceived to a 16-year-old girl. So I come from a pretty meager means, and I sometimes will tell people from where I come from, you either end up dead inside or you end up dead. It's a pretty tough place to be in, and being raised by a teen mom and everything that comes in the world. And so we were on welfare most of my life. I grew up with no network, no business to learn anything from. My mom hadn't even finished high school. She did the best with what she could. Luckily, I was born in Canada, so we did have a lot of options available to us for, if we want to do extracurricular or anything like that. It was actually all paid for by the government. It's not now, but so my mom just used it. Anything I wanted to enroll in, I did it.
Mhm.
Organ, ballet, baseball, softball, soccer, bowling, basketball, badminton, like anything I wanted to do, which was pretty much anything I possibly could do, I did. So as long as I could get there, then I was able to do those things. So I think that really helped a lot in multiple ways. And I haven't talked about this in a long time, so you're getting something fresh. That part of it, yes, it was learning and feeding my mind. There's a book called Range out, and he talks a
Mhm.
lot about how specialty isn't necessarily a good thing. But I think for me, it was also a way to escape my home life. Not that it was always terrible, but there was a lot going on there. And so it gave me an opportunity to have really good mentors, to be in a good space where I could develop skills. And, coaches were really great, and just a
Mhm.
very positive environment, especially. Obviously, I'm an overachiever. And what people don't really realize is I'm not really that competitive. I just love to learn and like achieve stuff. Like I love to just learn something, master it. And so that's kind of a bit about my story there. And the other thing too is I worked at McDonald's for 4 years. People don't like, I don't talk about it that much, but like I couldn't get a job. I was 15 years old. I mean, I was delivering papers in the lemonade stand and, those sorts of things, babysitting. But like I had zero network and no name. Like my kids, they just they just throw their last name around, tell them they come from a farm, and people know it's Dutch. And I mean, they got like a job on that. Like it just takes them 5 seconds. They pretty much have any job they apply for. Like it's
Really?
not like that for me, right? So yeah, I worked at McDonald's for 4 years and I freaking loved it. I love the atmosphere. I love the working with people. We learned systems. But at the end of the day, it taught me hard work. I mean, I was a hard worker, but to be able to do like grunt work, flipping burgers or
Yeah.
anything that needed to be done. I mean, I worked in drive-through because I'm pretty fast. Obviously, I talk fast. But I just want like that really set me up because the next time I went and applied for something, it was like, oh man, this girl will work at McDonald's for 4 years. We want her. She's gonna stay. It showed loyalty, grit, development, and a lot more. Could I have maybe gone and done other work? Probably, but I did have some other part-time jobs while putting myself through school. Because when I worked at McDonald's, I was finishing high school. I'd moved out early and I needed to move out early. So I had to self support myself. And so I had two jobs while finishing high school. And then I
Mm.
went to university. I also had two jobs while going to university full time, taking a full load. So, but yeah. And the other thing is, I got married at 20 years old, started dating my husband that I'm with now when I was 16 years old. And we will be together 30 years this year. So that is my
Congratulations.
lifelong accomplishment because where I come from, nobody stays married later. We just like have no skills. We don't know how to stay married. But
I can totally
yeah.
relate to everything you just said. I came from a town too. It was the same kind of thing. There weren't a ton of role models. There wasn't a ton
Yeah.
of activity. Like old industrial town, hit some hard times. Blah blah blah. Right, same kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
What were some of the early activities that you had other than McDonald's? McDonald's for 4 years. That's a resume bullet by itself. I did 3 years of like fast food and but nicer kitchens. So it was like, you
Okay.
know, but McDonald's is its own entity, and that like you get huge points there. What were some of the other early activities or things that you were doing that like carved that polymath skill set early on?
Okay. Well, just a little side note about McDonald's. Eventually, like it wasn't too long. I ended up just doing the training, so I wasn't always flipping burgers, and so I would
Sure.
just come in and when I was university full time, I would just come in and do the training. So I really liked training. Um, Yeah, I honestly didn't even know I was a polymath until about 3 years ago. Like, I didn't even know what the term was. Who the heck knows what a polymath is? I mean, now people know because we write about it. I write about it online, but I didn't know what it is. Someone just told me. And how did I become that? I'm going to say something kind of honest and it's something a realization that I came to later. I'm not using this lightly. That I realized that I'm a learning addict. Like I'm addicted
Yeah.
to learning. And I realized not that long ago that that's my coping mechanism. So when you're
Mm,
living in the present and you are so busy learning and like so full and it's exciting and wonderful and explorative and also you're like able to problem solve and think of new things and you get on a high when you come up with like these epiphanies and you help people and those are all coping mechanisms so that I didn't have to like live in my past, I think.
yeah.
And I was just born naturally curious and acutely observative. And I can remember being 6 years old and sitting on the couch and listening to my mom complain that welfare wasn't giving her enough money for the telephone bills, but she's smoking. And I still remember thinking, well, that's because they don't give you money for the welfare. They don't give
Mhm.
you money for smokes, right? And so like that to have that so young, I obviously had this acute awareness that we see in polymaths. Some people say curiosity comes first, but I think all children are born curious. But that acute awareness is an extra attribute that combined with curiosity just can go like crazy. So I would say that I just literally if I want to solve a problem, sometimes it's my own problem. I just literally go to master whatever it is I need to do. So one example before we move on is that I when my husband and I got married, we started my husband and I farm. We I'm a managing partner of a fairly large crop farm in southern Alberta, and when you have a business, and it's something maybe we're going to talk a little bit about later, but when you have a business and you make income, you haven't paid any taxes. And so we went to go file our taxes at H&R Block, and the guy told us we owed some like insane amount of money, and we didn't have it. And we were just like, "What?" I was in university, and just trying to make ends meet. He was making $1,000 a month, and I'm going in debt, and we didn't understand how taxes work. And I have a business degree. I took one tax course in university for accounting, but it was like some complicated commercial corporate stuff that you would not, you don't even do a tax return. And I just remember feeling so unbelievably helpless. Like
Yeah.
how I didn't want that to happen again. We were ill prepared for it. And so I decided to take a course on top of my accounting degree and specifically in taxes. And I
Mm.
freaking fell in love with tax law. I always wanted to be a lawyer when I was a kid, probably because I wanted to right some wrongs. And it wasn't until later that I realized that and then I went into be an accountant and decided not to be an accountant. It's a little too, sorry, any accountants out there, a little boring for me. It's just,
Yeah.
but tax is actually a crossover between law and accounting.
Hmm.
So I fell in love with it and made a career of it on top of the farming. So in actuality, I had two careers at one time. With the farm, I do all the finance plus help run the farm. I don't run the equipment anymore. I've only done a little bit. Um, and then also I've had a couple other side businesses in between that, but that's like photography. I ran a professional photography for a while too during all of that, three things probably at one time, probably a few more things, but
It's
that's
so
it,
cool.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
So yeah, the other thing that I forgot to say about polymathy, and I just want to bring it up because I haven't talked about this in a while and I have to write a note about it, is that polymathic people have a higher capacity than most people do. And I've noticed that time and time again. They have longer stamina. That's a big one. Um, they can take on more learning without getting overwhelmed as easily. They thrive in the chaos instead of shutting down in the chaos. Um, and so I just had a really, really high capacity. I could be on like 6 committees and running 3 things and raising my kids and everything and being a good wife all at the same time somehow. So, and it didn't seem like work to me. It was just easy.
do you think so? Like, this is so fascinating, right? Like, because I think polymath, it's such an interesting term, and I've seen you use it so many times. And like when I first started seeing your content, it really sort of resonated. I was like, oh yeah, like I get like, and everything you're talking about with the range and some of the intersectionality of like where you're finding these different types of intelligences or learning, and like
Mhm.
and the way that sort of metacognition all sort of fuses together. It's like it's such a fascinating thing. In your opinion, do you think there's more polymaths? Like, do you think we're like graduating more polymaths or less polymaths right now? Because I could see a really interesting case for either, but I'm so curious on your perspective because you know this space so well and like you live it
Yeah.
and like, yeah.
Yeah, Grok told me I was, like, chatting with Grok the other day, and it told me I was, like, one of the leading experts in polymath or polymathy, and I was like, "Wait, what?" I don't know how it knew that, but obviously because I talk about it in Twitter, and it was pulling it down, and I was like, "Whoa," and then I was like, I can't wear that, that's too much," but, I guess, if you were to consider the population, I probably know a lot more about it than other people do. Um, you know Yeah, I mean, that is so loaded. I came up with something. Okay, so first of all, people ask me, am I a polymath? And I always respond, first of all, I'm not the polymath police. If we talk about what a polymath is, let's break that down. A lot of people like, what does polymath mean? Obviously, there's a lot of things you could think it is. I won't go into some of the more enamorous ones. But like, really, polymath comes from the Greek word poly, which means many, and then matheus, I probably didn't say that correctly, but learnings is
Mhm.
what that
Yep.
actually means. It doesn't mean math. And so it's many learnings. And then in the Renaissance period, the Italians had a term, universalis. I don't speak
Hmm.
Italian, sorry, which is universal human. And so the idea is it was popularized during the Renaissance. There's probably more than the scope we can talk about in this podcast about why the Renaissance specifically happened. In a short nutshell, the Medici's in Florence were probably the most holistic leaders of all times, and maybe likely the less greediest of all leaders there ever were. And they would spend their own money on bringing in all this knowledge from around the world. It just happened to be that Turkey was going through a lot of turmoil, and they had a lot of knowledge. They're very, very smart people. And really good at documenting. And so these Turkish people were escaping and bringing in all of these world documents from the Middle East and things they'd collected from China and Egypt and everywhere else. And so, literally, if you were in Florence, you got the hub of some of the most profound wisdom and ancient learnings all coming into the city that they were
Mm.
paying for. And they created their own library. And then at the same time, the printing press happened in Germany. So, so then they were able to replicate, which is when Leonardo came and he started to be able to get a couple of these books and he would study some because he really didn't have any official, he didn't have any formal training, any formal education. And that's the whole story in itself, why he didn't. First of all, he was what they would call a bastard child back then. So
Mhm.
so he had no rights to go to school, even though he lived with his father who was wealthy. Um, but he was denied an education in the academic world. But so when you talk about like where people are on that, the term polymath became popular during the Renaissance, and it's really generally known to mean at least 3 diverse domains. So I don't really judge anyone on that if you've got 3 diverse domains or not. I do. If you were to take like agriculture and then like tax accounting and then like photography. I mean, I have more than that, but like even just those 3 alone, I've done all of them at an extreme professional level and would be able to advise at a top level. But you don't have to have top level in all those things. So what I developed is something I've coined this term. I call it the polymathic spectrum.
Mhm.
And so we can see from a very young age children who are polymathic. And I believe that many children have been diagnosed as ADHD when in fact they're polymathic.
Hmm. Yeah, I can see
And
that.
instead of, right, exactly. And they would say that Leonardo da Vinci was ADHD. I mean, definitely he would drop projects and, like he would only do half painted projects or have his team finish some of them and he'd get bored with them or he'd get reinterested in something else or, like he even had a couple business ideas that would have made him insane amount of money, but he's like, "Nah, I just want to pursue my interests." And now we see that as a negativity. So, I mean, in his time too, it was negative as well, but he really didn't care for the most part. He was more like the pursuit of learning and mastering the things that was important to him was more
Mm.
important than being super affluent. As long as he had his needs met, that's pretty much all he really cared about. In his older years, a little bit that changed a little bit, but in his younger years, it was less that way from what I'm studying. So when we talk about like generalists and polymaths and multi-potentialites, I have something called a polymathic spectrum. I've got a graphic I've actually made up from it, and I just put everyone on that spectrum. If you really want to go like where I am on the spectrum, you could, but those attributes, there's these like attributes that are the same for everyone. They do well in chaos. They're critical thinkers. They connect dots that no one else can do. They can pull from one discipline to another to create a whole new idea.
Yeah.
They're people who've done sports, arts, science, and maybe they're not the top at all of them, but they're quite proficient in a number of them. I get asked a lot the difference between a generalist and a polymath. Sometimes I actually believe that generalists are polymaths, but at least they're polymathic. And so does it really matter? But it's easier to say you're a generalist because we can kind of come across as a little pretentious. Like to say I'm a polymath is super pretentious. But which is
Right.
so funny because I could list off 10 masteries completely okay. I could like list them all off. But if I say I'm a polymath and don't even tell you what is my masteries, no, you can't do that. That's super pretentious of you. So I've struggled with calling myself a polymath, and sometimes I've actually taken it off my bio and like my banner because people give me grief. And then someone will message me and be like, "It's because of you and you owning it. I felt like I could own myself." It's almost like this, like I call it the polymathic awakening. I like made that up. And it's basically this whole thing where you're like, wait a minute, there's nothing wrong with me. This is how I was made. It's okay for
Completely.
me to pursue 5 things. And, this idea that we all need to be specialists. And before we move on, I just want to say this whole idea about specialists really comes from like it's not the way humans are set up, by the way. We're just not set up to do the same thing for our whole lives. I mean, some people are, but you have to look at almost everything that you see in society is an overreaction. So then you have to
Mm.
ask yourself, what is an overreaction to? So I went about and checked this out. The education system is an overreaction. So obviously, they wanted public schools everywhere available to everyone. And so what ended up happening in the industrial revolution, we have Henry Ford coming along and he needs industrial factory workers. In fact, everybody's moving out of farms into factory. Well, we need to educate people to be factory workers, not thinkers, okay? Like,
Yeah.
or not problem solvers or like managers or businesses. And so literally they're factory workers. And if you think about a school, it's set up like a factory actually. It's the lot. I
Yeah.
mean, and that's what I mean, you kind of have to do that for public education. But I want to add one more piece to it. So we've got factory workers, and you have to remember that school was only about half a day to start with. Even when I travel to Ecuador, people still only go half a day. They use one school, elementary in the morning, junior high in the afternoon, and seniors in the evening. They literally use the same school and rotate the kids in the same school. It's not like here where we have different schools for each one. Um, and so they were able to pick up the what we call soft skills at home or in their parents' businesses or whatever. Well, what happened a bit later, and I'm trying to remember the year of it, but 15, I got to get the year. It's 15 or 16. Anyway, so the Russians launched Sputnik
Hmm.
and the whole world went freaking crazy because now we have to match the Russians. So if you think about our education system, what do we have an over percentage of? Math and sciences. I had to take in Canada, I had to take 3 sciences. Well, you don't have to, but like if you want the high level one, you take 3 different ones. No arts were a requirement to graduate, other than language is considered an arts.
Hmm.
But like, so that's an overreaction. So here we have, and then math. I know in the US, you guys have all a bunch of different math streams you can take, algebra, statistics and all that. Where's the finance? Where's the economics?
Hmm.
Where's the like account? Like none of that is in the maths, which would make way more sense. They weren't trying to produce entrepreneurs or business people. They're trying to produce people who could compete with the Russians and people who could work in the factory. That's it.
Yeah.
And then one more thing about the specialists, you also have to remember that when people go to school, the person who's teaching the class loves the subject. They're not always a specialist. We all know that the person who's teaching math probably never even did a scientific discovery in their life, or teaching science, sorry. But it's in their best interest to have their pupils follow them. So, whatever their passion is, they want their pupils to be passionate in that exact same specialty. So they go to university. Yeah, you should be a mathematician. Yeah, you should be a chemist, whatever. But I mean, a lot of the teachers weren't even a chemist themselves. They just the chemistry professor who studied it
Just
with
a
a good
very
PhD.
different thing. Yeah. No.
So that's kind of my long bit about generalists versus specialists. But I think we're seeing a big pushback, a lot of homeschooling, a lot of realization that we need to be more flexible. The world isn't factory workers. That's all sent out to developing countries now. And in developing countries, people won't even work those jobs anymore. So
Yeah, it's a really fascinating thing to really sort of tease apart, because I agree with everything you said. I mean, like the school settings that we have right now were built for the Industrial Revolution, and they've
yeah.
stayed exactly the same. I've worked in education for a long time, so like sometime like in the 1930s, there was a massive revitalization of curriculum, and it's like largely the same. There's blocks that have changed. There's school
Mm-hmm.
system, blah blah blah, right? You know all this. Um, what I'm having a hard time like sort of putting together in my mind, right? It's like we're seeing, we see the labor gaps, we see where there's needs, in different areas. Uh, what I can't really sort of put together is, and I'm, is, are we in a place where we're going to see more polymaths that are popping up, or are we killing more of them? And I can't really sort of get a read on that, but I'm hyper curious because we have in this sort of age of AI and advancing technologies and things that are just completely changing like how we interact and work and do all those different things. It seems like there is a new crop of people that are sort of standing up and that have this wide range of skills, like, and they're able to sort of be polymathic and work in these different capacities and problem solve. And I'm seeing this sort of new age of solo entrepreneurship and like things that just get me so excited because I'm like, okay, this is
Mm-hmm.
great. This is going to fits in needs. This is going to do these different things. And then the counterculture, I think you have a lot of people that are doing almost the exact opposite of that, right? Like, I'm just so curious from like your view on like sort of like where do you see gaps, like where do you see opportunities and things that like where people can sort of step in and solve these big challenges that society's going to have in the next like 2-3 years, because things are changing very very fast. And I think you have early adopters that are moving like incredibly fast, and then you have the other side, which is like, I'm not going to change anything. I'm going to keep doing things. And then you have like the other, 90% that are somewhere in the middle, right? Like, how do you make sense of all that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say that I think that these polymaths or polymathic people always existed. They just hid themselves very well.
Mm.
When I apply for a job, I'm taking 30, I'm taking 90% of my stuff off my resume because they
Mm.
get confused when they see too many things. I'm only putting on there. So you think I have a specialty or only one thing. Maybe I'm not going to tell you that I've been running a farm for 20 years. I'm only
Yeah.
going to tell you that I'm a tax expert. So, it's just been in the last bit where they want to see that flexibility and where we're starting to learn how to articulate those skill sets. Um, so when I do think they were already there. But it looked bad to jump what they would call jump jobs,
Yeah.
and so people just wouldn't put it on there or talk about it unless you're immediate family and you'd get shamed. But I do think that Silicon Valley definitely changed the landscape for polymathic people because there's, the purple unicorn. When they land that purple unicorn hire, that's basically a polymath person. So I think that concept is becoming more popularized. It does take a while for the decision makers, who are generally the older population who've been trained to think a certain way, um, to adopt. The other thing too is, like, I live in a house that's over 100 years old.
Hmm.
And I'm going to tell you that, like, if I want to make a change, I have to deal with the foundation and the foundational pillars that are already here. It's, to do renovations, there's only so much I can do. When you're starting something new, I mean, you can adapt. So when we look at organizations and the decision makers, like the education system, they're running really big foundations. Some of them have cracks in them, but they're still trying to run on that same foundation with those walls, and you got to fit within those walls. And so that's very frustrating for polymathic people because we tend to see patterns, and that pattern recognition is not only, it's present, backwards, and future. So that's very hard. Sometimes the people we're talking to want to get on board, they just simply can't. They got to wait till the building crumbles completely before they can put up a new one. So but obviously, if it wasn't for COVID, we wouldn't be having some of these conversations we already are, because it forced the
Mm.
world to see in a very fast way that the world can change literally overnight. Third week in March, and the world changed overnight. Um, just before COVID, I was actually putting together a platform for virtual volunteering online. And I was going to nonprofit organizations, and they're like, no, volunteering is when people come here and, serve food and, you know, and I was like, and, and at my own church, I was just like, look, the future is pajama churching. I actually called it pajama churching. I'm like, where everyone's just going to want to church in their pajamas. And they just laughed me out the door. I'm like on record, even talking to, on record. And this was like in 2019. And the 2020 March, literally the whole world went to pajama churching overnight. And then people come to me and they're like, how did you know that? And I'm like, because I hung out with young adults for 2.5 years. You want to see the future? Hang out with young adults for 2.5 years. I knew where this was going.
It's true.
So, but I couldn't get any of them to listen.
Mm.
The decision makers to listen. The younger ones would, but they're not the decision makers. But now decision makers are like, wait a minute, we sometimes have to hear these things. So I actually think, I haven't thought about this before, but I think one of the hardest things for a polymathic person is getting people, the ability to get people on board before it becomes such a problem that you're putting out a fire. So like preventative and proactive as opposed to post. So that's one of our biggest challenges. The World Economic Forum, yes, I'm going to say this in public. I hate that I have to quote them, but they did a really great study. I'm not happy with their world domination agenda, and I will say that in public.
Yeah.
Um, but they
You're
did put
on
out
the
a really
same
good.
page. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna be in trouble for that one. But anyway, I was a little too naive when they first came out, but I'm not naive anymore about that. They did put out a really good study, and it went across, I can't remember how many countries, a lot of countries globally, and they were looking at what's the skill set coming down the line. And I'm going to read the list to you that came out for 2023. I put this together because I just literally filmed for a course on Monday for polymaths, and this is kind of in there. So here's what's coming up: analytical thinking and innovation, active learning and learning strategies, complex problem solving, critical thinking and analysis, systems analysis, creative originality and initiative, leadership and social influence, resilience, stress tolerance and flexibility, reasoning, problem solving, and ideation. And then there's a couple for technology, but those are hard skills, which we can talk about right after this. So those are the soft skills. About 5 years ago, one of my coaches, interestingly enough, he's polymathic, which I didn't even know what that was 5 years ago, but now I recognize it. He had rearranged his resume so that he did it exactly like this. That was the whole part of his, or
Yeah.
CV, depending which country you come from.
Yeah.
He literally put his skill set, and then he just put at the bottom which jobs he worked at, like just as a bullet point. Like the traditional method is, I worked
Mhm.
at I worked at Prairie Land Farms Inc. and I was the CFO and the managing partner, and these were my duties, right? That's the traditional. But he didn't do that. He said critical thinking and analysis, and then he just bullet pointed where he got those skills from. And when I saw it, I was like, this is brilliant.
Yeah.
And when I saw this study that came out, I was like, yep, that's the future. These are the skills. And I hadn't thought about this till you and I were talking, but I think just showing case studies is going to be important. And I have a secret project on the go right now. And I literally just talked to the guy who's helping me do it. And we were just talking about how my stories are actually case studies. And so we're going to tag them in the rag as case studies. And I think that will help people in the future getting jobs, showing how they creatively problem solved.
Yeah.
So those are the
Very,
soft
very
skills,
cool.
and polymathic people possess these, which is why I created the polymathic spectrum, because people on the spectrum have pretty much all those soft skills.
Yeah.
But
I love
yeah.
that. There's so much you said there that I could react to.
Yeah, right. It's like a fire
But
hose. Sorry, you caught me in fire
no,
hose
no, no.
mode.
It's brilliant. I love so much of what you just shared and said. What are the hard skills that you see as sort of
Okay.
necessary for this new success? Because I couldn't agree more with those soft skills. I'm so glad to
Yeah,
see
for
them
sure.
on there. I haven't seen this study, so I'm pumped to go
I'll send it
research
to
it
you.
myself. Yeah, thank you. It sounds amazing. Like, what are the hard skills that you really sort of see as being pertinent?
Okay, number 1, Python. You got to learn freaking Python.
Gotta
I
learn
wish I would
Python.
have. Pardon?
I gotta learn. I know like this much of it. I need
I
to
know
learn
none.
more.
And so many of my, because, I took like math all the way to high level university because I wanted to, not because it was a requirement. And so I think, my friends are like, your brain is set up for coding.
Yeah.
Why aren't you coding? I was like, I never needed to, you know. But now, because I'm doing the secret project, I'm finding out that all the AI bots are coded in Python.
They
And
are.
I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I would have learned this, 4 years ago when I had time. And I asked my friend, I'm like, okay, shortest amount of time to learn Python. How long is it going to take me? He's like 3 hours a day for 6 months. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't have that.
It's a steep learning curve. Yeah.
Well, I think I could learn it fast. And I'm aging. But so anyway, number 1, I think Python. And here's where I'm going with this, because at some point, people are going to come to a company and be like, here's my AI bots that I built. And they're going to bring those to the company. You're going to get hired for those. Or you're going to be able to manage them or finesse them or whatever that's going to be. So number 1 higher skill, obviously Python. And then these AI skills, it's kind of hard to like specifically put them down, but definitely like if I was to like think them through off the cuff, ethics going to be a big one. Working with governments, implementation. Darn Canada won't even let us have Bard or Claude right now, which is ridiculous because we can have Chat
Huh.
GPT and Perplexity and all these other things, but those are banned. So because, they got to figure out what they're going to let into the country. But anyway, that's a whole nother rant. AI training. So you want to like anything AI training, AI efficiencies, monitoring, monitoring. The thing is, you can get AI to do stuff, but you see, this is where I think polymaths are going to rule if they can figure out how to sell themselves. Because if an AI created a tax, like, we have an AI bot to help you go do your taxes, let's just say.
Mhm.
Well, it's really pulling information from all over the internet, and it's not really true. It's not always correct information. And
No.
like if I type in tax and I live in Canada, it might actually be pulling rules from the US, because people don't say this is the IRS rules in their articles. They just act like everyone's from the US. So it gives you that. I've tested it. So you need someone monitoring and like double checking, and they need to have enough of the efficiency to know whether it's telling you. You almost need to be a specialist, but then you need to already cross over AI. So you're not even, you're already becoming polymathic world by then. So I
Completely.
do think that
A prompt
any skill
engineering
set you
course
have,
goes so far. Like it's just like
yeah,
basics on prompt
but
engineering, basics
it's
on
more than that.
language
It's like
learning.
how to
Yeah.
build your own bots, like, and how
Yeah.
to edit them and that sort of thing. And then also how to get companies to be more efficient. So, I mean, those are some of the hard skills that I think are the most important moving forward. Writing is definitely another one too, but digital literacy is like, it
Mm.
used to be that writing was the most important, but I would now say digital literacy is the most important skill there is. And
Mm.
schools aren't even set up for that. Heck, my daughter the other day couldn't even do an Excel spreadsheet. And I was like, wait, what? I didn't teach you Excel spreadsheets. I thought you did that in school. She goes, no, we never even opened one up. And I was like, what? She's 23, 22. And I'm like, you didn't do an Excel spreadsheet or like a Google sheet? No, we never. I'm like, big breath, Samantha, big breath.
Big breaths. Big breaths. Something. Yeah.
Yes. Just before we move on from that, I want to say something. I haven't labeled this yet, but I came up with my own acronym to kind of cover what I think moving forward to succeed means. I call it an ACES framework. I've come up with a better term than that. So ACES is an acronym. Okay. So this kind of covers all of the soft skills as well as active skills. So ACES stands for A is for analysis thinking. Okay, so that can be systems and feedback and evaluation. And then creative problem solving is the C. So ACE, efficacy assessment. I wish I could have
Mm.
I could have used a different one. A lot of people don't know what efficacy, and it does have different meanings depending on how you apply it. But essentially, it's someone who can do high level thinking and like assess what are the secondary effects.
Mm.
So, like, for example, in India, I'll just give you this example. So, someone who could do this would have been able to prevent this. Oh, actually, I'll come back to that in a second. So, ACES is solutions leadership. Okay. And these are the future entrepreneurs. These are people who can do these three things. Okay. So, I just want to say, because efficacy is a hard one. People are like, what does that mean? Especially if English isn't your first language. Hopefully, you can keep up to my speed. You can always put me on slow. So efficacy is like, so that secondary, like the ripple effect. And so I'll just give you this example, just so people have something, an analogy to stick to. In India, there was an area that had a problem with cobras. And we call this the cobra effect. And maybe you've heard of it. There's another name for it, but no one even remembers the other name. So I can't remember some weird name that somebody probably put their last name on it. So basically they had a whole ton of cobras. So they decided to put a price on the cobra. So if you brought in the cobra head, you would be able to get paid for the cobra. I mean, we've done this with gophers in our area for farmers, right? There's a price on it. Well, that worked great. That started to reduce them, but the entrepreneurs decided to start breeding the cobras because they could get paid for the cobras.
Right where my head went, personally.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So these entrepreneurs are like, wait a minute, I can make money off this. So they started breeding cobras. Well, the government figured out that all of a sudden, obviously, this is a problem. And there's tons of these breeding going on with the cobras. So they stopped the program. Well, if I'm not getting paid to feed my cobras anymore, to raise them, what am I going to do with them? I'm going to release them.
Mm-hmm.
So all these people who were breeding on these cobras released them, and they ended up with more cobras than they had before they even started the program at the beginning. Yeah. But this is what I mean by efficacy assessment. So yeah, you have a creative problem solving. That's only part of it. Okay, what happens if we implement this? How does it affect this sector? How does it affect the stakeholders? How are people humanly going to react? And as a farmer, I'll leave this part of it. This whole thing about fertilizer reduction at 30% reduction that we have to hit by these targets in Canada, they're saying 2025. There's a reason why Europe is a big mess right now, because unfortunately, the farmers aren't articulating what the world really needs to hear. If the governments can enforce this, and they do, I promise you that the secondary effects are catastrophic.
Yeah.
Catastrophic. We're talking about massive, irreversible environmental damage to the land, because what's going to happen is the farmers are going to react just like these people did with the cobras. We're going to start producing crops that don't need as much fertilizer. So we're not going to be rotating. There's going to be an overabundance of certain crop types. There'll be a world food shortage. Prices are going to go up for the food. I mean, I could just go on. And so what we need is people who think of efficacy. And in fact, I almost think it's more important in some ways than some of these other things, because a lot of people can be creative problem solvers, but not a lot of people can connect the dots and do pattern recognition and behavioral analysis. So,
Well,
all right, that was a
second and third order thinking are
yeah,
massive. I
second
mean,
and
they're
third order. Yeah,
huge,
that's what we call
right?
it.
Yeah, completely. And like, what are the downstream consequences of these decisions?
Yeah.
And how do you
And do
build
they
in
outweigh the
incentives?
ones at the beginning?
Right, and how do you incentivize people to do the right thing that, like, that does the second order effects and, like, that hits it? And that's a tricky value proposition, right? Like, in the Cobra example, like, how do you incentivize them to not breed them? Or, like, to like, all those things get, like, a little bit sort of trickier
Well,
when
the
you really
issue
put
is
them
that
on.
you have people making decisions that aren't the stakeholders, like with the farming.
Yeah.
We already are reducing our fertilizer by over 30% in the last 10 years, probably. We're already doing that. So, like, they're asking for something we've already done. So, like, they should be able to just check mark it off. So, we can't go a whole lot more than we can. That's like a bigger conversation. But the other thing, too, is I'm going to say this, and I'm saying it out loud. Okay. Remember what I told you about the school systems, how we didn't take finance or economics or any of that?
Mhm.
All of the world leaders went to the same school we did. Did they take any education on finance or budgeting or economics? They were taught by the exact same education that we had, unless their parents were business owners and shared that. So I'm telling you that the reason why we have mass bankruptcies, the governments are like in massive debts, is because they never got those skill sets either.
Mhm.
I mean, there's more reasons than that, power and all of that. But at the end of the day, like, all those checks they were sending out during COVID, I mean, they kind of knew the effect, but they didn't know the secondary and they didn't know the secondary and third sex
Completely second and third order
effects.
effects, and there's
Third order, sorry,
sometimes
yeah,
been a
sorry.
lack of accountability too, right? Like with some of
Yeah.
those sort of pieces, right? If you don't have direct accountability for it, and you're not incentivized to sort of make decisions that go for those second order, third order effects, then yeah, they get really tricky.
But part of the problem is the voters aren't trained for that either. Like the voters don't realize they're being manipulated by these things that really don't mean that much. They think they need them a lot, but at the end of the day, if you can't feed your family, some of these things we're spending all
Mm,
day fighting over mean nothing when you can't feed your family and put a roof over your head. Or like in Canada, um, like when it gets to minus 40, no joke, we need heat and electricity, and those carbon taxes kill people. Like, and then,
mm.
like literally can't afford it. So, those are way more important than some of these other issues, which I won't bring up so I don't get a bunch of hate mail.
Yeah, yeah, completely agree. So we've talked about like a lot of really sort of fascinating things, like for small businesses, because I see you doing this like amazing work. I know you do some sort of consulting in those spaces. You've built this own, I think, like really cool emergent brand and tapping into some massive important like, where do you see this sort of small business world going in the next couple of years? And where are some of the gaps that you think people can meaningfully fill?
It's so funny. Like I was saying before, when I was building this virtual volunteer system, I was just trying to tell everyone the world is going to flexible work, where they can work from
Yeah.
anywhere, they can go in the office part of the time. Dads are tired of missing out on their entire family, life, this commutes and all of this. So we've seen that pushback already, right? And I think that the micro creator or micro businesses is the way that of the future. And I'm going to say micro instead of small business. um, I did that intentionally because when you small business doesn't mean small or small income. Micro just means you're a micro market.
Mm,
Um, and it's much more attainable. Like a small business it can be quite encompassing. By the way, pretty much every entrepreneur is polymathic, where they on that spectrum is, you have to be to one to create the idea, one to do like you have to be like 1,000 hats in one day. I mean, only a polymathic person can handle that even. But where I see the future is definitely micro businesses. So feeding a specific problem, and maybe those change. I'm solving this problem today, but in 5 years I'm solving this other problem. So I really recommend to people to think about your what I call the through line. So it's what
mm,
connects you. So when I sometimes coach people, I use this lean canvas model that we use for business. It works really, really well. And so I have this thing, it's called Act on Your ACE. I apparently like the ACE acronym. And then my mentor uses ACE. I didn't even know that he used it. And we were both using it for different things for a while. But I call it like basically you're acting on your unfair advantage. So you're like just literally taking an inventory of all of your experiences, your education, things you did because you wanted to, and then like
Mm,
finding what's the tying line between all of them.
mm.
And then like that superpower that, because you got to wake up every day and love what you do. And I think what let's talk about mistakes after this, about like common mistakes I see. But this is how you can set yourself up for success. Is just like really take an inventory of those things, and then like think about what of those are overlapping. Some people call it the ikigai thing, but I don't really like that as much for what I'm talking about here, because polymathics just have way too much stuff.
Yeah.
So like, even for me, it could be love of learning. Well, I'm a good teacher because I just love being in the learning system. I love taking courses, and so then maybe learning or teaching is my thing. So just like, what is the commonality between all of them? Um, and then and then the other thing too is like, so what's called a lean canvas models, which we use in business. So it's essentially like, first of all, like, who's your customer? And I think what people don't realize is you needs to be someone that you like, because if you don't like the people you serve, that's just a big waste of your time. So, and they
It's
also have to have
huge.
money.
Yes.
So when they have to have money, but that comes a little bit. It's like, who do you like? So I tell people, like, who do you glow around? Can you talk around all the time? That's super important, because these are who you're going to think about all day. You're going to be solving their problems. You want to like the people that you're serving. And so that's number one. Who are you going to serve? What problem are you solving? Number three. Now I changed the lean canvas model because very polymathic style. I put number three, revenue streams, because
Mm,
if you can't make money at solving that problem, then that's a hobby. And then you got to be okay with that. But a lot of people put revenue streams way down the lean canvas model. This is like I can share it. We'll share it with you later if I don't know if you've seen it. There's some variations of it, um, but basically, so you go through revenue streams. Okay, so that's number three. Number four would be, what's your solution?
mhm.
And three and four can kind of go together. And then five would be, your unfair advantage. Like, what's your unique value proposition? How are you solving it uniquely?
Yeah.
So when I'm talking about AI, if you're a tax expert and then you pair it with AI, freaking how many people have that? Like, I helped the Kenyan Revenue Authority run the very first social audio space, teaching a new tax
Mm.
rule to Kenyans. I'm
Yeah.
from
Who else can do
Canada.
that? Yeah.
Well, because I know how to run social audio, but it's not just running the tech. I know how people work. I know how to set the space up. I know this, but I also know tax. I literally just
Mm.
read their tax rules, and they're all British based originally. And I was able, like, I guess they told my partner, they're like, how the heck did she know all this stuff about our tax? And I was like, because I'm a tax expert. I could literally hang up a shingle right now and just go consult with countries all over the world and help them go teach tax knowledge to their citizens on social audio. Like, that's a
Yeah.
niche
Yeah.
if I wanted to
You
do that.
found that unfair advantage, but you also found the market, right? And you need
If I
both, which
wanted
is
to,
like,
yeah. I mean,
yeah.
that would be a whole thing in itself. But
Yeah.
okay, so value proposition. Next would be your channels. How do you do it? Is it through social media,
Mm.
email marketing, opt-ins, blah blah blah? Next is metrics, right? How do you know how your business is doing? So that's important. Next up, I put cost structure. So like, what are your costs going to be?
Hmm.
And then the last thing, oh, sorry, the last thing is, what about you can you do that can't be copied by anyone else? That's how you can sell yourself to your unfair advantage. So those are just ways, but I definitely recommend that you go very quickly to find out whether or not you can make. I'm reading it off. That's my eyes are over here. I
Yeah.
pulled it up before we started chatting. I was like, pulled it up quick, my lean canvas model. But I
That's
call it act
perfect.
on your ace. See, they call it the lean canvas model, but I restructured it a little bit and called it act on your ace.
I love that advice. I've never heard it framed this way, but I love that advice you started with around the through line and finding the
Uh,
commonalities with all the different things that you're doing. That's such, because I'm with you that Ikigai just doesn't fully resonate
nope.
with me.
It's
It
way too
doesn't.
confusing. And I'm like, doesn't work for us polymathics. Well, and
Yeah.
here's the thing of crazy. So where I got that from is I landed a TED talk in 2021, and that's how they teach you to create your TED talk. You come up with a
Mm.
through line. And
Oh.
we were talking in a Twitter space or an X space, I guess, like about a couple months ago, and someone asked me about, how do we figure out, what's our thing? And I was like, oh, the through line works. So I hucked it out. People loved it, tweeted about it, and asked me about it. So then I wrote a post. I could share it with you. And since then, a friend of mine, Danny Roeder, I'm going to share it with you. It's amazing what he did with the through line. He like took a
Really?
whole weekend and just and he's gone to doctor school in music and been an educator and all these things. And then he wrote out the most beautiful synopsis of like music is his through line and how he sees the world. And like, so then he
Very
really
cool.
started to just own, like, okay, I'm going to own that everything I do moving forward has to be an element of music. And that can manifest in different ways, because systems are music, right? So people don't realize that. Like one time, just a side tangent, but it relates to this. I was mentoring this young gal, and she was really upset with herself because she'd gone to university and took a 4-year bachelor degree in music, and then now she's
Mhm.
working in a seniors home, work and doing like their programming and stuff.
Mhm.
And so she felt like her 4 years was a waste. And I mean, first of all, um, yeah, I'm trying to come back to that. But the thing is, arts, by the way, side note, let's go back to education for 2 seconds. No, I'll finish the story and then we'll go back to arts. Sorry. So um, then I said to her, well, look at, and I mean, I know quite a bit about music. I'm not a good player, but I was good at the theory. So I said to her, I'm like, well, how do you structure your days with your seniors? And she goes, well, we have busy periods and rest periods, and then we have times where they build up we have ways to build up their stamina. And then anyway, I was like, well, this is all music. It's just like a
Yeah,
song. You've got your
completely.
you've got your high times and your rhythm. You've got your choruses where people relax and have something familiar. They hear the familiar. I'm like, how is that any different than what you're doing? You probably rock at your job because you understand the power of rhythm, highs and
Mhm.
like active times and rest times and repetitiveness and storylines. And she's like, I had no idea. That's exactly how I run my programming.
Yeah,
And so she didn't realize that. So her through line is music, but it manifests in different ways.
that's so
So
powerful.
yeah, she was like, oh, she like was all sitting up. She's super,
Yeah.
super, super tall after that. But I do want to say the thing about music and arts is what people don't realize is during the Reformation, so the time of Martin Luther, the separation of the Catholic Church in Germany and in Middle Europe, um, the Reformation was all about not being Catholic. And one of them was they got rid of the arts.
Hmm.
And so we see this burning throughout Europe, some of the most beautiful masterpieces, all the way through Italy, some of the monks, and they were like burning art. And then the churches after that, if you look at the, non-Catholic churches, they're very plain. They don't have, a lot of them don't have stained glass, unless you come from Anglican, which is a shoot off of the Catholicism, a closer one than some of the more Protestant ones. But you don't, for the most part, you don't see that kind of art that was celebrated before. And then there's this whole thing now. It's like, well, you can't make money at art. But what people didn't realize that art helps the creativity to problem solve in sciences and like all these other places. But I think it's not just about solving problems, it's about wellness. Because art
Hmm.
is your place for expression, it's for creativeness, it's for seeing the world and observing and processing out, but processing in. And then it's just like a calm and peaceful thing that we do. And we took
Yeah.
that away from people and wonder why there's mass depression. There's more to it than that. But I
It's
think that,
it's a form. So many pieces of art are like a form of mindfulness, right? Like
right.
it's this bigger, it's this self expression. Like I watched my daughter, who's 8. I watch her draw, and she's just in this completely different world when she's doing it. She's
Yep.
not talking. She's not like, but there's completely different activation energy than when she's doing math or when she's trying to sort of solve
Yep.
something or do something. But it's like this really sort of like human self expressive thing that to like that kind of I think for anybody like polymath or not or no matter where you sit on that spectrum of like it's gonna do so there's so many second and third order consequences and holistic consequences
Yep.
of what you're doing that we don't even necessarily can easily sort of put into words that like but to completely discount the benefit or what that's doing for the person's psyche or any of it
Right.
I think is really really short-sighted.
Well, that's because the world measures in what's called quantitative. So quantitative is hard numbers. Finance is obviously one of them. We're measured by how much money we make, a lot, or how much debt we're in would be the other side of it.
Yeah.
But we forget that there's what's called a qualitative. So those are intangibles. but they're both equally important. Only one is more measurable, easier measurable by, others. It's just like the school system. A child can get a C, but could be one of the top students. They just don't take tests well, let's say, or something like that. So, or they can't finish on time. I don't know, whatever. Or they read their words backwards, but it's not a measurement of the child's intelligence. It's just a measurement of that metric that you could do it the way the other students did. So I do think that we're starting to see, when I listed those soft skills before, that is qualitative. And so we're starting to see more of that movement and a pushback. But I think that we as a society could do a lot more for our younger generation by really bringing back the arts and not cutting that
Yep.
program first. And it gets them off their, I mean, I get there's art on digital devices, but like to the kinetic, the touching is very
Yeah.
important. Like, what do kids actually touch that's natural anymore? And there's like a grounding. I mean, you sound like very holistic, but when you walk on the ground, like outside with your feet, there's a
Yeah.
grounding that happens and an energy. Where do they get that from? So art is one of those ways to get that grounding and reset and stress relief and all of that. There's something that I read once that women, when they would knead bread, that was like a big stress reliever. Like,
Mm,
I imagine all these women in ancient times being, my mother-in-law's driving me crazy, when they're like pounding that bread, but they're getting the stress out. And art is like that. It's a stress outer and a bringer inner. But anyway, that's my bit about arts. And we'll I think that's something you want to talk about, is like pitfalls of what mistakes that entrepreneurs often make.
yeah, no, completely. You nailed so many different pieces of it. And I've got an interesting study I'll follow up with you, and I don't want to cite it right now because I'll be completely
See,
off. But so much of what you're saying has
it
actually
sounds like we
been
could
backed
probably
up.
talk like 3 days.
My gosh, no, so much of what you're actually saying has been backed up by science in terms of there's some really fascinating research I've seen out of Stanford around just
Cool.
sort of
I
like
actually
brain
haven't read all the science.
activation
I
and
just watch people.
yeah, it's really fascinating. But like what a lot of the points that you're making, I've seen sort of backed up a little bit with this. And I know you're being really generous with your time. So maybe I could sort of wrap up with like one or two last questions. But so
Okay.
curious from you, like, if where do you like if I was coming to you, or if anyone was coming to you and just saying, like, I'm going to start a business in the next couple of years, going to sort of make a transition, how do you think your advice would differ from most people? And I'll give you a little bit of context, right? Because I see you making all these fascinating connections. The framework, the way that you think about entrepreneurship is so unique. It's very holistic. It's grounded. There's the your advice, I think, just sort of runs atypical to what I've seen in a really positive way. What would be the first two or three steps that you'd be sort of advising somebody to really sort of like think about, um, that might sort of differ from the common narrative?
Uh, well, I actually don't talk about business online very much, which I probably should be. And some of these are mistakes that I've made and just learned. So in hindsight, number one is this idea going out that you have to build this audience. And I found out that it often can take up to 18 months before people will buy from you. So this idea that
Mhm.
you need to educate first. And I've done this,
Mm,
right? Educate people. Even I've done this with Polymathy because no one even knew what it was. And then we don't monetize fast enough. I mean, who can wait 18 months? I mean, it used to be 2, 3 years before you make your money back, but that shouldn't be anymore. And I've done the same thing. I've poured tens of thousands of dollars into a project and not asked for money in it fast enough, or my investor fell through because something happened to his company or whatever. So
sure.
these things happen. But my advice, let's go back to it. So if I was starting out as an entrepreneur right now, the first thing you want to do is test your idea. And I'm going to tell you this for a reason, the holistic reason. See if you even like solving the problem. Because like I
Huge.
literally have 20 businesses I could start up right now and make a ton of money at. But do I want to spend all my time solving that problem? Maybe for a month, but do I want to do it for a year or two, or sink all my money in it and think, because people don't understand that when you work a 9 to 5er doesn't understand. They think that their boss makes money off their back and all of this. That's not true. All night long, they're literally thinking about their business. They're getting up at some insane hour. They're paying bills. They're working on weekends. They're on holidays and they're answering emails, and some employee quit, and like there's all of this. So you got to love the problem you're solving. So I really recommend that you try it, even if you do it for free, or just charge a small amount, ideally a small amount. And there's a reason for that. Because you'll get more serious people. People need to pay for something for them to take it serious with you, even if it's small. And I've seen this all over the world.
I've made
So
that
yeah, find out
mistake.
if
You're
you even
right.
like solving that problem.
Great advice.
It's not whether you can solve the problem, whether you like solving that problem. And you're going to find out things like you think you're second and third order thinker, but you're going to see things and go, oh my gosh, like I solved this problem once and I realized that the people I was solving it from were going to be the never ending story. Like it was going to be like, constantly needing help. They just thought they needed a lot of babying. And that's not my style. I need to help people who can, I help them with the first paragraph, they write the rest of the chapter. And I like maybe do some, coaching along the way, but I'm not like holding their hand through the whole chapter. That's not me. And most polymathics actually aren't that way. We're the starters, not the people who stay forever. So that's number one. Number two is charge way sooner than you think. And I learned this from Virgil Brewster, actually. So what happens when you give everything away for free, which is what they're teaching online, is, and I've done it because that's what Alex tells you. Alex Hormozy even tells you this, give everything away for free. But then when you start asking for money, the audience you have is like, wait, what? You're the guy who gives it to me for free. And they're buying from other people for the very thing you're serving. So ask like your first email, and I'm going to, when I start my email sequence, the very first email is going to say, hey, if you want to buy this, and it's going to be a small ask because now they know they buy from me. And I know I've got serious people involved. So that's the second one. You need people to buy from me, even if it's just a small, $25 founder course or like just, something small, Notion template to get them started. Don't give everything away for free. And then the other thing that I will say, I'm just checking my notes here. So I gotta, so I lost my train of thought because I don't like going through my notes. Oh yeah. So the other was your lean canvas model that we talked about, that we were just like, first of all, who do I want to serve? Do I like them? What problem am I solving? And then, can I make money at this? And like, that's before you even go really anywhere else. You almost pretty much just need to do that. If you can't make money at it, yeah, it's a hobby. I'm going to tell you, like, I went into professional photography for a while because people were like, oh, you're so good, you should do it. And I had like Monopoly, Hasbro asked me for one of my pictures for the Canadian Monopoly edition. And I have pictures hanging in magazines or in museums and in magazines and stuff. And what I realized is I did it because other people told me I was so good at it that I should. And it's nice to see your stuff in a museum, but it took the joy away from me in a lot of ways. And I started like doing professional photography of people. And then I was like staring at their pictures and not even processing my own kids' photos. And so I realized that I took a hobby and made it professional, and that it wasn't as fun. It wasn't as therapeutic for me anymore, because I discovered that photography for me was a therapeutic means, not meant for money. So that's why I think that it's important for you to try it first. Where does it fall? Maybe it's just a hobby where you help people out, or it's a side gig. And then the very last thing I think is to how do I want to articulate this? Get help sooner than you think you need it. Like, especially polymathics, we think we can do everything, and we freaking can. And this is hard to say, but we can do it better than the people we hire often. And that's super frustrating. It takes me longer to explain it than for to get somebody to do it. Or I have to correct it because, it's not what because I'm kind of perfectionist. And so I think that is something that we really have to work on, is just getting people to do the pieces, especially the ones that don't give you joy, so that you can rock the stuff that does give you joy. So that's another mistake that I see. And I make all these mistakes, by the way. Every single one of these I learned the hard way. And some of them one cost me $60,000 to learn this lesson. So I'm not just like being, light about this. So
no, I've made every single mistake that you just shared. And
I'm still making some of them.
One that resonated most.
I'm a better coach than a player.
I think I've made these like this week. No, completely. Like the one that I was like trying to not interject too much. But do you like it? I just kicked off this project where very long story short, I gave away a free lead magnet. It works great. It solves a very sort of specific problem for my for higher ed clients. I hit send on this email and luckily it was a test, like, thank goodness. And it went to a couple hundred people, and immediately people are asking for all of this sort of support on the free products, and I'm like, God damn it! Like it's like because it was really easy. I thought I set the parameters clear, but I'm like, I don't like the support piece of what I'm sort of like offering here. So
Yeah.
yeah, that advice is dead on. Really, really resonates. Samantha, where can people
Well,
find
otherwise,
you?
if
Where
you
can
would have
they?
tried and just sent it to 3 people, you would have picked that up before sending it to a few hundred.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was trying to sort of go like who. Well, I was testing like this cold sequence to just kind of see like, okay, do they?
Right.
Because the testing I did with it, people liked it and were like, okay, love this
Mhm.
product. It works really sort of easy. When I send it to more people, yeah, a lot of the sort of specifically people that I don't know, they're like, hey, I like this, but, and I'm like, I could have like, one, I could have charged for this, or two, I
Yeah.
could have like put tighter parameters and we wouldn't have this, but all learning,
Well,
right?
I think it's because polymathics are like a go big or go home. Like it's very common. So we're like, just put it out, it'll be fine. And then we're
Yeah,
like,
just
we can deal with
go.
the problem as it comes. I mean, that's how we are. But then, yeah, the older we get and the more we have responsibilities, we have to start to think, oh, wait a minute, this ties into my kids' time or my wife's
Yeah,
time or like, and so we start to realize that even though we're capable of doing all these things, it's not fair to the people who love us that, we took on more than we should. So
completely. Well said. Well said. Samantha, where can people find you? Where can they connect? Where can they learn more? Should they subscribe to a newsletter? What should they do?
my newsletter. I have like all these subscribers that I prefer to talk than to write. I can write, but it's just so laborious for me.
Yeah,
Um and and then I'm not doing other things that I want to be learning. So yeah, please subscribe. I hope to be more regular. I've got my secret project, which should maybe help me get that going a little bit more. Yeah, you can find me over on X or Twitter mostly. Keep trying to go back to LinkedIn, but it's just been a really hard one for me to do. It's just,
yeah,
I don't know. I'm just not good at the accolades thing and just accolading people for the sake of doing it. But Twitter's getting that way too. When I first started, we were much more interactive, like very, very
yeah.
conversational. And here at not Reddit completely, but more elements of that. And it's definitely turning
Completely.
into more of a LinkedIn or politics. So I'm not loving it as much as I did.
Yeah,
So, but yeah, I like doing podcast interviews, though I don't know if I'm going to do any more for a few more weeks. I'm trying to get my tax farm stuff in, but I would like to do more public speaking. Uh, so paid public speaking, not free stuff, people. So paid public speaking, and other than that, yeah, my website is up, and it doesn't have everything on it that I've done. I mean, what do you do with that? Like polymaths are a moving target. We build a website, and it's already it's
it's
already
already out of date.
outdated within a month.
Agreed.
Yeah. So, but yeah, sign up for my newsletter and you'll find out what's going on. I do send out sometimes things, but even just updates and let you know. Started the new Polythinkers initiative. And so then I let my newsletter list know about it so they can join up. And right now, that's a newsletter. The plan is to open up a community. We haven't figured out all of the pieces yet for that. But yeah, please find there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. Let me see if there was anything else that, oh, we talked, did I? One thing that I think that is important for everyone who's listening and maybe says, hey, I'm polymathic. I'm someone who's, multi-passionate and people say I'm ADHD. Uh, it's just more from a personal perspective. It is the worst when people ask you, oh, you're not going to mount anything. You're not going to make anything. And I just want to like encourage people to know that not everything is about the metric of others. Like how they
Hmm.
measure you isn't that important. In our youth, it goes both ways. Either don't care or you care too much. But just like putting that into balance is really important because the older you get, the more you realize that wealth is not about money.
Hmm.
And Leonardo da Vinci, like I was saying earlier, had many opportunities to make a lot of money at his businesses, but I think there was like a needle he came up with I don't know, he had this needle that he created and it would have made a ton of money. But all the other stuff that came after, he would have been too busy running that business. And I'm not saying you shouldn't run a business, like they're important. I'm a business owner and businesses give back to the community. We employ people, we provide shelter, we provide stability, we provide services. I'm a huge fan of businesses. but I don't think it's your end all be all. And as a polymathic, it can tie you into something that isn't fulfilling if you're the kind of person who needs a lot of variety, and that's okay. Just know that you may not have that same kind of legacy. Like, obviously, Leonardo was well known in Italy, but not really anywhere else until, his journals were discovered and all of that. So it might be 100 years from now before people discover you. But legacy is tough for people. And I think it's really hard for polymathics. But
Hmm.
something I hope to work on, hopefully in the not too far future, is just really, I don't know if I should be saying this out loud. I really want to help people figure out or I want to help people amplify their thought leadership, because polymathic people are have the most beautiful thoughts inside, and they have world-changing ideas. Like, I have an idea of how to save premature babies, or like how to help them survive and be healthier. That came from a polymathic mind, but I haven't done anything with it because I'm not running a business for it. I don't know who to talk to about it. So just like figuring out how can we share these creative solutions that we have so that other people can build on them, and just knowing that sometimes we're just not going to be the one that builds them, and just being okay with that. So that's how I want to end it. But I want to say that polymathic people are very beautiful. And last but not least, it's been my experience that polymathic people are extremely empathetic.
Hmm.
So, and you have to be in order to do what I call perspective shifting. So, perspective shifting is my superpower, but I think it's the superpower of all polymathic people, more so because I have the photography. And so I'm very conscious about zooming in and zooming out in macro mode and, wide angle mode. But uh, that empathy serves us well. It can be scientific. Sometimes our empathy is taken as empathy when really we're just scientifically very curious. Why do you
Hmm.
act that way? Why do you behave that way? But I really just want to say, I want to recognize that all of you are very, very empathetic people. And that is a superpower. And it's something that as you age is harder to tap into as the world gets heavier